15th of August 1983, releasing the book on Sri Aurobindo, published by the Government of India.
We were speaking last evening about the importance of August 15 vis-a-vis Sri Aurobindo. Now, I don't remember all that I spoke, but I have at home here a very bright young companion who is a budding technocrat. He set up all these loudspeakers and wires, and then he had to go to the sports ground for his group activities. And by the time he came back, we had all finished. Obviously, he wanted to acquaint himself with what had transpired, and he took the cassette on which our proceedings were recorded, and he was hearing it. I was busy with something else. At the end of it, he came to me and said, "But you didn't speak of India's getting independence on this day." I said, "Yes." I was caught on the wrong foot, and I realized that it was too important a matter to be forgotten. So I said, "Let me make amends today," and that's where I will begin. You know, Sri Aurobindo has observed on more than one occasion how his will for any major event in the world has failed in the long run. He said it might take time, there might be disasters, there might be catastrophes, but ultimately his will has prevailed. Then he observes that he does not consider Indian independence on the 15th as an accident, but as a seal of God on his effort, his work. And then he says, only as my will was functioning on the over-mental level and not on the supramental, I got a birthday present in 2 packets, India and Pakistan, though I would have been very pleased to have only one. And a little later, in answer to a question, he said, what has been artificially divided has got to come back together. And when he was asked when, he just said offhand, 10 years. People were waiting 10 years, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 10th year. Pakistan didn't crash. But the old setup of Pakistan changed forever. There was a takeover by the military dictatorship. And I remember mother saying, "This is that." That was an occasion. In things in that dimension, it is impossible to predict accurately in time moment, because there are constant new possibilities rising up. And it was obvious that the moment came for a big change, but new possibilities had intervened, and that possibility was either pushed further or replaced by some other possibility. He used to live in a consciousness of eternity. He could never be disturbed. He never lived in the flow of time. So for him, what is 10 years? What is 100 years? When K.M. Munshi came a few years later, couple of years, and Sri Aurobindo asked him, how are things shaping? He was very pessimistic, Munshi, and spoke of the difficulties created by Pakistan, and he said he doesn't see any possibility of Pakistan being reunited. But Sri Aurobindo said, but I see it coming. And when he said that, there was no second saying. That's what Munshi reports. He lived in eternity. He lived in infinity. It would amuse you to know that around 24th of November 1926, Mother records that she was observing the presence of Lord Krishna around Sri Aurobindo. She was observing, and at a certain moment, it got into Sri Aurobindo body. So after a while, she came to where Sri Aurobindo was working and told him, Krishna has entered into you. It appears he just lifted up his head, smiled, and said, I know, and continued with the work. For him, it was not a big deal whether it was Lord Krishna or any. He lived in a consciousness that was anterior to the gods. This is not to say that he was higher than all gods, no. He lived in that consciousness. And I believe that normally that one realization would have passed on like any other realization for him. But he took that opportunity to entrust everything in Mother's hands and said that he was retiring. Naturally, you know, it caused a lot of heartburning and resentment. And when Anil Baran Roy, who had obtained an interview with him before the date, he obtained an interview before the 26th, but the date was after that. So he came, he was told you can't see him, but then he said, he has written to me that I can see him. So when it was conveyed to Sri Aurobindo said yes, and he went and met Sri Aurobindo. The first question Anil Baran asked to Sri Aurobindo was, why have you done this? Why have you stopped seeing us? Why have you retired? Sri Aurobindo simply answered, otherwise my disciples would have finished me. You catch that? He made it a convenience. Of course, he could always be aloof from everything. But by nature, he was a very reserved man, a very taciturn man, not given to fraternizing with people because he was always conscious. He even observes, I have tried my best to stoop, bend as low as possible, but you are not coming up. He told his disciples, this is all before the ashram formed. He was loath to talk about himself. He had put an embargo on any biography, writing of biography. He said, why do you want it? The life of men of his type, he said, was not on the surface to see. And it would have remained so. But Providence willed it otherwise. You know, there was a Marathi gentleman, Kulkarni. He wrote a small biography of Sri Aurobindo. And there were a number of errors which Purani found out. He took them to Sri Aurobindo and asked him. Sri Aurobindo corrected. So Purani wrote it as an article or a letter correcting all those mistakes. So there was some data to begin with for others. Then there was Shankar Gaud Patil here during those days. He was a friend of Dr. Srinivas Iyengar, who was a principal at Bagalkot College. He seems to have persuaded him, why not write a life of Sri Aurobindo? So he wrote a small book to begin with. And when the typescripts came, Sri Aurobindo agreed to see. And with his small handwriting, he made marginal notes. A very systematic correction. And then we came to know many things which we never knew. So they were incorporated. Iyengar's book came out. That was the first English biography of Sri Aurobindo of that size. That was followed by Langley in England, smaller biographies by others. Purani's biography came out in Gujarati, some came out in Bengali, but each one standing on the shoulder of the previous biographers, as always happens. And things started multiplying. Wrong accounts started appearing in papers, in Ramakrishna journals, journalistic acrobatics, and Sri Aurobindo corrected them. Muni wrote answers, rejoinders, Sri Aurobindo corrected them. Muni is Suresh Chakravarti. And so it went on till the biographical material started expanding. During the centenary year, there were a number of biographies, and it was only about 3 years ago that I received an invitation from the Ministry of Information of the Government of India, Publicity Division, asking me to write a biography of Sri Aurobindo for inclusion in the Builders of India series. I was just about to go on a tour of United States, the third, and I wrote to them that I would be happy to do it, provided they are willing to wait till I came back. It might take about 8 months. And they wrote, certainly we would wait, but you kindly give priority to that work on your return. And as I mentioned yesterday, on my return, I took up that work and it was done in about 3 months. And when I wrote that book, naturally, I took advantage of all the existing material. But I found that every biographer had drawn heavily on Purani's book. When he wrote it, everybody laughed. It is only a chronicle. There is nothing else, only a record of facts. But that foundational work that he did has been of human service to everybody. Everybody consults it, whether he admits it or not. So, when I completed the work, I dedicated it to A.B. Purani, to whose pioneering efforts every biographer of Sri Aurobindo is indebted. And I sent the manuscripts. Thereafter I had another tour of Europe, America, and I couldn't attend to proofs. The editors from Delhi. They had their own way of handling things. They said, why do you want this, why do you want that? I had labored and put very fine mottos for each chapter, just as Sri Aurobindo has done in Life Divine chapter. Leading quotations. Just one sentence, half a sentence, gives the key to the development treated in the chapter. But they scold off. So a friend wrote to me when I was in Seattle, Northwest America, saying that they are interfering with this, or shall we keep the works suspended till you come back? But I am not a believer in missing the muhurta, So I said, no, let the work go on, and I give you full liberty to agree or not to agree with the editors. So the work has been going on for ding-dong for the last 3 years. And this time, they made up their mind to bring up the book. And my friends succeeded in keeping the bulk of the writing as it was. Only, they have quietly changed the date of my preface from 1982 to, from 80 to 83. And it was to arrive, yesterday a friend sent it by air, especially. It was to arrive before evening's function yesterday, but the car broke down. The man came by bus, and it reached my hands last night at about 8:30 or 9. And as I was just looking, I found one of the first casualties of the editor's discretion was that the dedication page itself has been left out. It is rather too late for me to tell them now. The mottos are not there, I knew it. But I was sorry that a sincere dedication to a man who has done so much for Sri Aurobindo's movement should have been left out. I don't know whether I will have an opportunity in the second edition to repair the mistake. Well, there it is. Here is Sri Aurobindo, 400 pages. Let me forget that I am the author. And let me forget also that you are all my friends. Now, it runs into 70 chapters. But each chapter is small, woven round one incident. We are apt to pass off incidents as just points in his life. But I have woven the past and the future around certain incidents. So there are brief chapters, and about 70 of them. Naturally, all are documented. And in the preface, from which I would read out just a few portions, my first contact with Sri Aurobindo took place in a strange way. I was 13. One afternoon, I was idly browsing among books in the office-cum-library of my brother, who was an advocate. The dusty bookshelves were full of old leather-bound volumes of All India law reports. Among them was a big green book which excited my curiosity. I pulled it out and found it was entitled Alipur Bomb Case. I opened it, and my eyes fell on a photograph with the words Aravinda Ghosh beneath. The name acted on me like a mantra, and I found myself repeating it with obvious delight. It was something sweet and melodious. I later spoke to my brother of this experience. He wrote about it to my mentor, Sri Kapali Shastri, who told me that the meaning of my finding the photograph in the book would become evident as I grew up. And so it did. For soon my childhood impulses towards God grew into a hunger, and I devoured the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the works of Swami Vivekananda, and so on. I asked Sri Kapali Shastri whether I could go to Pondicherry and join him there. He was definite that I should continue my education and prepare myself for the quest in the meanwhile. By that time, Basis of Yoga by Sri Aurobindo had been published. It was a beautifully bound volume costing only 3 rupees, and it became my companion. Within a couple of years, in 1937, I had my first darshan of Sri Aurobindo on August 15. It was overwhelming, and I felt the only thing comparable to him was the Himalayas. I still remember the slight smile on his face, molded of compassion. Speaking of his face, I recall how my guide's guru, Vasishta Ganapati Muni, whose meeting with the mother I have described in the previous issue of the service letter, and it has created a lot of interest. When he came in 1928 and had Sri Aurobindo's darshan, he was asked, how did you find him? He was a born poet himself. So he said, it was a rishi who had lived for 500 years. There was so much of ripeness, so much of maturity on the face, that he said this man should have lived for 500 years. Well, that is that. Sri Aurobindo's photographs, which you see now, that's with the taken in 1950, don't do justice to him. Mother herself remarked, that was not Sri Aurobindo. In fact, when he was approached to sit there on the sofa, 1950, for Cartier-Bresson, he was not enthusiastic. But when he was told that mother had said, immediately, that was his consideration for mother. Mother has said immediately, whatever his views or his feelings, he would set them aside. He came and sat. And mother says, there is a care. There is something weighing upon him at that time. That was, he knew he was going to go, live. And the only photograph really, which I personally like, and the world likes, is this one, taken in 1920. It was taken by a very ordinary photographer called Latour in Pondicherry. Bansidhar or Purani, Champaklal, somebody brought him. Sri Aurobindo was standing, it was a standing photograph. This has been taken and developed, and it is the most inspiring picture. There is one done by a Danish painter, profile, we call it Christ-like. Think as a thinker. And that was the second one, which has one appreciation. But these ones, 1950, they do not really represent pictorially what he was. We used to see him thrice a year, and after 1939, after the accident, 4 times a year. Brief. Before the accident, we could go to him, place our head on his lap. He would bless, then mother, then those of us who were greedy would place our head in between, and both the hands would come from 2 sides. It is to take plenty of time. But after the accident of this fracture, mother didn't want to expose him to physical contacts from people. So a barrier had been put in which people could put garlands, they could stop. But he was so sharp that before I was to meet him, I am to see him, my turn is coming. But he would have seen 3 people or 4 people behind. But he wouldn't miss me, of course not. But he could know. At times, When the number became large, Nolini would give him a typed list of the people. Accordingly, he would see. When numbers became more, when his eyesight was declining, he would ask mother, certain people, who is that? And she would tell him. Well, there are days which can only be described, devasagataha. But they always have a freshness, a message, and having worked upon Sri Aurobindo's life, having tried to be as exact and as accurate as possible, I have seen that he lends himself to a very scientific treatment. There is no mysticism about him. He is very rational to the core. He gets an experience in Baroda, first year of his coming to India. When he is going, the carriage is in the danger of an accident. Horse carriage, at that time there were no motor cars. And he says, I willed that there should be no accident. And a golden figure emerged out of his being, mastered the situation, averted the accident. This is not just a story. 30 years later, or more, 39, he wrote a sonnet on the Godhead, on the same experience. It was a landmark in his life. It was his realization of a personal divinity. The divine as a person, as a figure. Later, his experience in Kashmir on the mountain, or in Pune on the Parvati hill, where he sensed the vacant infinite. That was his experience of the impersonal divine. In Alipur jail, it was the universal divinity, Narayana, Vishwadeva. So each one gives him a realization of God in a different aspect. He goes to the temple on the Narmada river. He had no belief in murtis. His friends Deshpande and others wanted him to come. And as he was admiring the sculpture, he looked at the deity and he says, "A world mother regards you." His entire outlook changed to the worship of idols. He says, the God, the divine, can speak to you through a stone, through a sand, through anything. So he had that integral experience. And what else do you expect him to write except an integral philosophy? If you ask him to accept Shankara's philosophy saying that the divine is formless, nirakara, how is he to accept? He said, yes, that is right, that is true. But sakara also is true. How are you going to convince me that this is less and that is more? As far as I am aware, he was the first man to boldly say that every of these realizations of saints and founders of philosophies is correct, but not exclusively correct. You can't set up realization of one against the realization of another. Each has to be taken complementarily. That was his approach. And long before she came here, Mother had an identical approach. They had absolutely no difficulty because both had a universal outlook, a universal and a cosmic consciousness. And they formed very good complements in this sense, that she had acquired certain knowledge of occult techniques which were needed to complete Sri Aurobindo's mission. The way to reach the help to others, Sri Aurobindo says, he had not found. It was when she came that that thing was there. But I am not speaking today of the mother. I hope there will be opportunities for me to do so in future. But of Sri Aurobindo. And as I said yesterday, I have not treated him as an avatar. I have not treated him as a philosopher, not as a mystic, not as a poet. There are enough books. There are biographies which are literally tilted. There are those which treat of his philosophy, yoga, mysticism. But I, in an humble way, approach him as a human being. To me, it is the human side of Sri Aurobindo, the human side of Mother, that is very dear. It is that makes my intimacy with them possible. There is an awe, fear, respect, all their religious things. Why should there be a distance between me and my Maker? To make you feel that intimacy, God comes down in human form. Sri Aurobindo says expressly in the essays in the Gita, I believe, that the divine comes down in the form of man, so that man may grow into the divine. Of course, man includes human. I would have been taken to task if I was in America. How can you always say man? They said. So they insist on using humankind. Well, that is by the way. And it is Sri Aurobindo as a man that is missed in many accounts. He was imposing. He was profound. He was Olympian in his own right. Nobody need say that. But when Nirodbaran describes a little personal encounter, when Purani describes in his interview 1920-21 how he joked with Sri Aurobindo and how Sri Aurobindo joked at him. When he went to Sri Aurobindo in 1917 first, or 18, I don't remember, first time, he saw Sri Aurobindo as any other well-fed Bengali, dark skin, short. In 1921 when he came, he saw Sri Aurobindo changed. He has a golden color, thin and agile. So he couldn't help asking Sri Aurobindo, what has happened to you? Sri Aurobindo replied, and what has happened to you? Because he had grown a beard. Purani had grown a beard by that time. So such incidents, they show how human he was. He didn't take offense. He never took offense. Even when people said things which should not be said to elders or to the gurus, he didn't take note of it. He never held it against anybody. And that is what I have written here. He was so humble. He would learn from anyone, from anywhere. One day he was sitting in the guest house veranda upstairs in serious contemplation. Obviously he had a problem. A familiar figure, Kulla Swami, a diminutive Swami, a short, nondescript ascetic with none too good a reputation, because he was taking bhang, was passing in the street below. Suddenly he turned, came up to where Sri Aurobindo was sitting, lifted a teacup which was on the table, a teacup, turned it upside down, put it right, and was gone. Later, Sri Aurobindo remarked that his difficulty had been solved. The cup has to be emptied before it is filled anew. No wonder the mother once said that the only humble man she had met in her life was Sri Aurobindo. It is this human side of Sri Aurobindo that I have attempted to present in these pages. Naturally, in a multiple person like him, every aspect enters into every other, and a plethora of radiant personalities comes up before our eye when we think of him. However, as of now, let us meet Sri Aurobindo the man. And there you are. I am suggesting to Shabda to order copies from the government depots and make them available. But these depots are there in all the various major cities of India. And I would like to have some feedback, as they call it, from readers, friends, well-wishers, as to how it registers, whether it brings them any nearer Sri Aurobindo, which is my aim. I think I have said enough. I have shared my thoughts. And now, before I conclude on this auspicious occasion, let us have a hymn to the Divine Mother, perhaps the oldest hymn in the Rig Veda, the most ancient in our scriptures. Mother refers to this in one of her talks, and it is always cited for the infallibility of grace and how the divine compassion covers everything. And all the gods derive their support and sustenance